And I just love that feel the word. It's so evocative. All right, well, on to Lex. Lex Williford is joining us he's at UTEP, University Texas, El Paso. And I haven't been familiar with his work, and I just got to know him and Karen over dinner tonight, and both so interesting. Just all the stories. And I'm going to talk more about you after Lex, okay? Okay. And their books are for sale back here also. This is what I learned about Lex. Well, he's pretty amazing, right away, you can say that. But he is, in addition to being a well-published writer in several genres, is one, well, you can tell more about
Fiction.
yourself, mostly fiction. And he is into the blues, and he's been a drummer for a long time, on and off, here and there with this band or another, and also into jazz fusion. I wish Diane could have stayed and heard you guys. I mean, all of y'all, or both of y'all there. Gotta watch that guy's stuff. Okay. Yeah, and well, we have in common our left-handedness, which Lex noted at dinner.
Sign of genius.
Sign of genius. I, of course, immediately concurred. And I think you're gonna read some personal essays tonight. Is that correct?
It's fiction.
Short fiction?
Yeah, but it's not autobiographical.
All right. Well, let's give it up for Lex.
Hey guys.
Hi.
It was very moving. You know, it's funny, last night I read with Nick Lauterbach over at the Salt Lake City Library. And I was talking about how I can't read the last two stories in this collection. I just can't do it. Every time I do it, I just, you know. So I don't try anymore, right? So I know how brave it is to do that. But then Nate came up and read after me, and he read a story that his wife wanted him to read because she knew that it made him cry. And of course he started to cry, and then I thought, man, this should have been a weep off, you know? I mean, I should have read the last two stories, you know? Anyway. This is a thing called Superman on the Roof. I lost a kid brother when I was 10. He was 3. A lot of the things that I'm going to read tonight just sort of happened. Okay, I kind of lied about them to make them more interesting, I guess. But the thing that is not true is the thing that I had to invent in order to create the drama of the story. And basically, it's that an elder brother or an older brother punches his little brother in the nose, a kid who bleeds a lot. So that didn't happen. I didn't do that. So, but anyway, we've got a couple of epigraphs, and I'm going to read. I think I'm going to read 3 stories. I guess I should also say that I think it's awesome that this is part of kind of an open mic thing. This is really great because everybody gets a chance to read. It's really cool. What's your name again?
Kath.
Kath. What part of England are you from?
Birmingham.
Birmingham. All right. Let's see if I can find these stupid things. The first one is from Oscar Wilde. I write about punishment and shame a lot. I find it to be pervasive still, that adult human beings can go around and hit their children and say that that's okay. I have a problem with that, I guess. One is sickened, not only by the crimes that the wicked have committed, but by the punishments that the good have inflicted. The second one's from William Styron, who wrote a wonderful book called Darkness Visible about depression, which is something I have had some experience with. The danger is especially apparent if the young person is affected by what we termed incomplete mourning, has in effect been unable to achieve the catharsis of grief, and so carries within himself through later years an insufferable burden of which rage and guilt and not only dammed up sorrow are a part and become the potential seeds for self-destruction. This is a story called The Code. January 1968. 7th grade, Mrs. Jaffrey's class, Lake Highlands Junior High. 3 years after my kid brother Jesse bled to death. It was always cold in Mrs. Jaffrey's class. It was always freezing in there, and every day I wore my coat to her class. Mrs. Jaffrey told me not to. Why not? I asked her. It's cold in here. I'm cold. Because, Travis, you're not supposed to wear your coat to class. She kept saying. It seemed pretty stupid to me. So I kept wearing my coat to class. I was cold. A few days later, Mrs. Jaffrey told me to hang my coat up in the principal's office. Told me to stay there for the rest of the afternoon. Told me to write her a 500-word essay on why I shouldn't wear my coat to class. By the way, the original version of this story was exactly 500 words long. Why? I can't do that. How am I supposed to do that? She looked at me over her horn rims. Her lips were white. She had her arms folded. The north wind coming up off the practice fields outside had glazed the window panes along the wall with ice. Be creative, she said. I sat in the principal's warm office and wrote 100 sentences on lined paper like the ones I'd written on the detention hall chalkboard for Mrs. Jaffrey after school. I will not wear my coat to class because someone might mistake me for a bear and shoot me. I will not wear my coat to class because I might sweat so much the class will flood and we'll all drown. I will not wear my coat to class because I might get so hot I'll catch fire and burn the whole junior high down. That kind of thing. It was more than 500 words. I never thought of writing as something I might want to do when I grew up, but maybe that's when it started. I thought it was pretty creative. Mrs. Jaffrey didn't think so, though, neither did my old man. Next day, he showed up outside Mrs. Jaffrey's class with my essay crumpled in his fist. Checked me out of school, told me to put on my coat. It's in the principal's office, I told him. Leave it then, he said. It was cold outside. Cold as Jesse's cheek the last time I touched him in his padded bronze box at St. Patrick's. Ice coated the trees, the rooftops of houses, the windshields of cars parked along the curbs, the sidewalks, the streets. My father drove his GMC pickup truck too fast, dodging fallen tree limbs in the road, sliding all over down to Pecan Park. My father told me to get out, told me to open the tailgate, told me to set my essay there on the tailgate in front of me, told me to bend over and read each sentence one at a time. There was a new 2x4 in the bed of the truck. The wood was white. Sorry, I lost my place. I hate it when I do that. And it's such a dramatic moment. My father picked it up, stood behind me. I smoothed the paper out, flattening it as it flapped in the wind, and when I read the first sentence, my father hit me. I remembered the long year Jesse was sick, how he refused to take off the Superman suit our parents had given him after he woke from his first coma. The day he smashed the Sopwith Camel my father and I built a few weekends, the old man didn't have to work. When I saw the biplane crumpled at Jesse's feet, just balsa wood and tissue paper, I didn't even think about it. I punched Superman right hard in the nose. Like a cashier at Piggly Wiggly, red stamping the back of a bounce check. Then it came, my brother's bright blood. It was 10, I was 10, Jesse was 3. After that, it was always bleeding. No platelets to clot, cancer of the blood, all that. And my mother could never get the bleeding to stop, cotton balls plugging up his nose, still seeping blood hours later till his eyes rolled up white. And my father had to rush him back to Baylor Hospital again. I read another sentence. My father hit me again. There were 100 sentences. My father kept hitting me. Boy, oh boy, I thought that I ever had it coming. The wind blew up hard and it started to sleet. And all around the park, tree limbs groaned and creaked and snapped off. Didn't have my coat on. It was cold. Ice fell all around me. Cheerful stuff, yes? Such a cheerful book. I have 2 nun stories. Are there any Catholics, recovering Catholics? Okay. I'm probably safe. Okay. Well, the last time well, not the last time, but one of the last times I read this, I was at a Catholic university, and there were 3 nuns in the front. Okay. I did not read the evil nun story. I knew better. November 1965. This is the good nun story. The morning after our kid brother Jesse died, somehow most of the other kids on the St. Patrick's playground had already heard the news before we did, keeping their distance from us during recess, staring at Nate and Maddie and me like we might all die from some slow, terrible disease. Maddie was sitting on the church parking lot curb picking her nose bloody when Duncan Anders told her, "Your brother's dead as a skunk." I'd kept an eye on her and Nate all recess like my mother told me to the night before, but her voice hoarse and raspy on the Baylor Hospital payphone. But Nat Jenigas had just hit the tetherball right past me. Maddie stood 2 years younger and a head taller than Dunk. "Is not," she shouted down into his face. "He's in the hospital." Had a little too much coffee tonight. "He died in the hospital," Dunk said, "while you were eating your boogers." Maddie punched Dunk once hard in the nose, and when he held his hands over his face, she struck the knuckles covering blood dripping to the sidewalk. "Sister Mary Joseph!" Duncan sputtered, a spray of blood spattering Maddie's white Van Lawn blouse. Then he hit her hard in the stomach. The tetherball spun past me again just as Maddie doubled over and fell back, the concrete-filled tire holding up the steel tether pole wobbling on the asphalt like a sewer cover. That's when I ran across the playground blacktop and jumped onto Dunk's back, knuckle popping his skull, wrestling to the concrete and turning him over to sit on his stomach and kneel on his wrists and punch him in the mouth as hard as I could. I shook out my tooth-cut knuckles. "What'd he hit you for, Maddie? Shitbag piece of shit." Said Jesse's dead, Maddie said, sitting on the curb again, wheezing and rocking and hugging her stomach, the skirt of her green plaid uniform thrown up around her scraped knees. All the boys gathering around and staring at the yellow spot of wet where she'd peed her panties. I sucked at my scraped fist and shook it out and swung again, Dunk's eyes fluttering as he flinched and tried to duck. "Sandy Meeks told me on the bus," he said, blowing a bubble of blood from his nostril. "Her mom's a nurse, I swear to God." "Liar." I hauled back to hit him again, but Sister Carmel soft-palmed both of my wrists and lifted me off him, weightless as an astronaut in space. "All right, everybody, it's over." Sister Mary Joseph shouted, a giant black and white domino teetering into the circle of kids, throwing up her hands and waving them off like the grackles scattering in the rectory garden. She jerked my wrist to wrestle me away from Sister Carmel. "All right, Truett, that's it. I'm calling your father again." She pulled me hard by the wrist, but Sister Carmel held me back. "You take Anders to the infirmary," Sister Mary Joseph told her, then gave my wrist another tug. "I'll take care of this one." No, sister, please. You don't understand. No one's told them yet. The younger nun nodded to Dunk. At least not till this one here opened his big mouth. Is that true? Sister Mary Joseph shouted at her favorite, the one who cleaned her chalkboard every day with a wet rag. Dunk looked down at his shoes, and the old nun pressed her yellow fingernails into his neck. You're coming with me. She started toward the infirmary, then turned back. I haven't forgotten about you, Truett. I'm still calling you father. Off playing by himself, Nate had missed the whole thing, and when Sister Carmel called out to him, he saw Maddie's bloody blouse and came running hard. Then Sister Carmel took his hand and Maddie's, and she led us all into the chapel and down the aisle and sat in the front row, where days later we'd sit with our parents at the funeral. Somehow, the young nun told us, the news had gotten out from Sandy Meek's mother, a night nurse at Baylor Hospital. And when the news had spread like chicken pox all across St. Patrick's, she tried her best to keep it from us till our parents could tell us themselves. She was sorry, she said, her blue eyes wet as robin's eggs in rain. He's dead, I said, staring up at the bleeding Christ, hanging over the altar, imagining my little brother hanging there, glad that my long, terrible suffering was over. Is not, Maddie shouted and sneezed, the words echoing all around us. Is not, is not. Maddie pulled a long, kinked strand of her red hair from behind an ear and held it out in front of her face, sucking it and sniffing it, while Nate made a tent of missiles from the pew holder, talking to himself like he did with his G.I. Joe in our bedroom closet. You can pray now if you want, Sister Carmel said, though I never understood how or for what. She stood back from the pew, knelt on the aisle, crossed herself, and turned back to the chapel door. 2 days later, during the long funeral sermon, I sat next to my father, shifting from one butt cheek to the other in the hard pew, sickly sweet incense and chrysanthemums and white roses scenting the air. And when the service was over, I carried a single tight-butted rose from Jesse's bronze box down the aisle through the crowd of mourners leaving their seats, and I reached across Sister Mary Joseph's lap and held out the rose to Sister Carmel next to her, a thorn pricking blood from my thumb. You guys seem to be doing okay. Is it cool if I do two more instead of just one? Okay, so we'll see. I feel like I should read the
Encore.
Oh, okay. I feel like I should read the Bad Nun Center story, so I'll do that next. The previous story, which I forgot to tell you, is called A Rose for Sister Carmel. This is called A Cross for Sister Mary Joseph. You know, all my life I've looked forward to the moment when I can use two words in the same sentence. Nun and ass. May 1966. Sister Mary Joseph had an enormous ass. Like the lower half of an overripe pear, draped like a bustle by her stiff rustling habit, which covered all of her butt, her blue-white hands and face, her stiff white cardboard wimple pressing her eyebrows down into a permanent dimpling frown. Every day before the end of class, we fifth graders stood in a long line up the middle road of the nun's desk, fretting about our penmanship or the short paragraphs we'd written about our upcoming confirmation or the difficult math problems the nun was always making us do over and over again until she pronounced them correct and perfect. The heavy silver crucifix of the suffering Christ dangling from her neck like a dagger. Andy Shoemaker, the smartest girl at St. Patrick's, sat at the desk to my left along the back row. Waif-like and beautiful, like a water nymph in a fairy tale. She had long hair to her waist with a grackle black sheen, draping her shoulders like the long black veils of the Sisters of Mercy. and she always needed to go to the bathroom. Raising her hand so often in the middle of class that Sister Mary Joseph refused even to look at her, calling on her favorite, Duncan Anders, even when Annie's hand was most often up in the air with the correct and perfect answer. Ignoring Annie, the sister sometimes called on me the boy who was always weeks behind and who kept his shoulders humped low over his desk and never raised his hand, the left-handed boy with freckles and the worst penmanship in class. Sinister, she said, left in Latin, when her ruler across my knuckles couldn't save my soul by switching my writing hand to my right. And he sits on the right hand of God, she pronounced in the middle of our confirmation lessons, walking straight down my aisle to the back and pressing her yellow fingernails into my neck. 2 days before our confirmation, Annie Shoemaker waited in the long line to the nun's desk at the end of class, me in the line right behind her, her ankles shivering in her patent leather shoes as she stood almost to her toes, waiting, her green plaid dress rustling around her slender knees like Sister Mary Joseph's habit rustling around her ass as she walked up the chapel aisle for communion. Annie's hands were folded too, as the sister had taught us, all to fold them for our confirmation, her fingernails pressing straight up into her chin. When it was finally Annie's turn in line at the nun's desk, Annie said what she always said. I need to go, sister. Sister, may I go? And the nun didn't even bother to look up from the words she was scratching out in red. You can wait until the final bell, the sister told her. Now go back to your seat and wait. Standing behind Annie, I heard a slow, steady hiss and watched the yellow pool of piss spreading around her shoes as she cried. Sister Mary Joseph leapt from her desk and said, "Stop that! You stop that crying right now, little girl! Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, now look at what you've done!" There was somebody last night who fell asleep during the reading, and I was hoping that part would wake her up, and it didn't. When Annie still hadn't shown up for class the day before our confirmation, I waited until Sister Mary Joseph had left the room. The only moment she gave herself all day for whatever private thing even a nun must do. And I stood on my desk seat along the back row, and I took down 5 white thumbtacks she pressed into the cork lining along the blackboard, where she'd hung the script of Annie's perfect penmanship. And while nobody was watching, I arranged the tacks, pin up, in Sister Mary Joseph's chair. A moment later, when I stepped away from her desk just in time, she returned to the room, smoothing down her habit, and told us all to get into our seats for our last confirmation lessons. I sat waiting at my desk, pressing my fingernails in my palms, hoping for her to leap from her seat as she sat. But she just settled herself heavily into her chair, as she always did, like a hippo's bum into mud. Then began our last lesson without even a flinch. Following her in the long line of 5th graders to the chapel for our last practice, I watched her demonstrate the correct way for us to walk down the aisle for our for our confirmation procession, pressing our fingernails piously up into our chins. But when she turned to the altar and began her slow wrestling walk, her huge rump stuck out like a camel's hump with 3 domino dots across and 3 down and 1 pinned to the middle, pinned there to her ass in the perfect shape of a cross. Vengeance. Ain't it grand? Sorry, that's a mean story, actually.
No, it was a good one. We probably ought to.
Okay, I'll stop. Very good. All right.
Thank you, thank you so much.
I haven't been inside a Catholic church for a really long time, but I went to a funeral once, and my child was a little girl. And we walked in the chapel, and she sees the bloody crucifix up there. And she goes, "Mom, don't they realize there might be children in here?" And then the tax story remind me why I don't sit down when I'm teaching. I scroll around. Okay. So next, we're welcoming Karen. Karen Brennan is Professor Emerita at the Emerita. You know, that means when you're still affiliated, but not full-time. Is that, I mean, or not,
Means
you're retired. Means you're retired. Let's get this straight. And she's published widely and at University of Utah, did I say that? And published widely again in many genres. And she too is a musician. She likes to riff on jazz vocals. She started out as an art major, a studio artist, and somehow made her way along to being a professor of English, quite distinguished, published in many genres and many wonderful publications, prominent journals, books. And I think tonight she's going to share with us her new collection of fiction titled Monster, and I guess we'll see what Karen has to tell us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here. Thank you, Star. Thank you,
Marina.
Marina. And thank you. And happy Halloween. My book is called Monsters. It's not a horror book. People say, oh, is it horror? We love horror. No, it's literary fiction, unfortunately. I'm going to read a couple of, some of these pieces. I'm a sort of hybrid writer. I write poems as well, and some of the pieces in this book of fiction were actually published as poetry in various journals. So, so I'm going to read a couple of those. They're just paragraphs, and I don't like to call them flash fiction. Everybody likes that term, flash fiction, except me, for some reason. Anyway, I'm going to start with a couple of those, and then I'm going to read another sort of, you know, I'm trying to keep this Halloweenish. So as we go, it will be a little Halloweenish. Okay, the first story is called, the first paragraph, is called The Couple. At first, Martin was with Aaron, then he was with Carol, but before that he was with Melanie. After he left Carol, he went back to Aaron, but then he met Joan and decided to be with her instead of Aaron, only he didn't tell Aaron, and when she found out, she blamed Joan. At the time, Melanie was with Gaylord, but then Gaylord died, so she began to be with Martin since Joan was away most of the time, though she and Martin both denied they were with each other to Joan. Dana wasn't with anyone, but Martin secretly longed to be with Dana, but he wouldn't admit this to Joan. Melanie, meanwhile, met Luke and told Joan she would be with him for a long, long time, and finally Dana met someone who kept changing his name, but she seemed happy with him for at least a week and a half. Martin recommitted to Joan since the others were taken, but Joan wasn't sure she wanted to be with anyone. Aaron really wanted to be with Martin and hated Joan, and Joan was tired of all the drama. She told Martin he should be with Aaron and that she, Joan, would be with no one since being with no one is what she most desired, since it entailed no drama. The older she got, the less tolerant she was of drama, said Joan. But Martin enjoyed the drama and refused to give her up.
Oh.
You know, my theme for tonight's reading, this book has 39 stories in it. I don't know how I managed that. You'd think that I would put one more in it to make it 40 stories, but no, it's got 39 stories. And so tonight's theme, there are many themes in this story, are going to be sort of more of a coupley kind of thing. So this next one is called The Vanishing, and it's a little prep for the bigger story that I'm going to read that's coming up. The Vanishing. He said he felt as though he were slipping away, each day more slippage. For example, a little chunk of his foot may go, then a fingertip, a follicle of hair, a few cells from the earlobe. At first, nothing discernible to the naked eye, nothing the average person would necessarily miss in the course of events. I did not miss these things, these portions of him. He was still dear to me at that point. Eyelashes and elbow, the shiny cavity formed by breastbone and rib cage, these went eventually. Likewise hair. Then on a blustery morning, the entire torso, and after soup, both legs and a hand. How can you still love me, he wailed. The wail was next to go, becoming vapor, then salt, which I still use sparingly. Okay. So, this next story is called Headless. This is a little longer, but not too long. And this is the last one longer. Headless. I was on my way to the bus stop when I saw the headless man. At first I thought it was a trick of the eye. I was wearing big dark glasses. Possibly the head had been camouflaged by the dark trees behind the man. Surely he couldn't be headless. As I approached, however, I saw that he was indeed headless. There was scar tissue on his stump of neck and a little tube sticking out for eating or breathing or both, I figured. You can all laugh at this. It's a hideous story. I don't know what possessed me, right? Somebody said, did you make that up or did this? No, I did make it up. Thank you.
I actually saw someone.
He was wearing an orange t-shirt and he was tending the university grounds with a weed whacker. Geez, I thought, a headless man. It was very hot that day. I was walking along without a water bottle, and it's likely I missed the bus. I had no schedule and would have to wait. I distracted myself from these concerns by wondering about the headless man. How it had happened. He was either born that way, poor mother, or it was an accident. I shuddered to think of the accident that might have befallen the headless man. How was it that he was able to live without a head, without a brain, eyes, ears, nose, mouth? How did he communicate? Possibly the headless man talks out of his ass. I chuckled to myself at the idea of a deep, articulate rumble coming from the headless man's ass. At any rate, he was gainfully employed. Without a head, he was managing to do a nice job on the flower. His body was well-toned, muscular, youngish. The orange t-shirt was well-worn but clean. Likewise, the sports shoes. I had a good look. I waited for a long while at the bus stop as predicted. I was really parched. I imagined asking someone for a drink of water, but no one was there. How would it be to ask a stranger for a drink of water? I decided that if someone came with a water bottle, I'd ask them to dribble a little on my tongue. I'd really do that. I was that thirsty. I thought I would faint. Then 2 people did come. One was a young woman without a visible water bottle, and the other was the headless man who sat next to me and who had a water bottle. What a dilemma. He squirted water on each of his arms, first one, then the other, and he rubbed the water into his tan skin. I wanted to lick his arm. He also smacked some water on his neck stump. This headless man had water to burn. Finally, the 3 came, and all of us got on. I took a seat beside a young woman who was a grad student in biology. All day she worked in the lab. No summers off for us, she said. Then she opened a book, and our conversation stopped. The headless man settled himself near the driver in the space reserved for disabled people. Well, he was disabled, after all. He had no head, and who knows how he did anything useful in life. During this time, I had a boyfriend called Mitchell. He was a nice enough guy, but I couldn't seem to muster up any real passion for him. God knows I tried. We had been dating for 10 years, and we did the usual things couples do, dinners, movies, sex, but deep inside, I was unmoved. It was as if my heart were a block of ice or a hill covered with thorns. From time to time, I fretted about this situation with Mitchell, but mostly I ignored it. Who has the right to be blissfully happy? Certainly not me. Now, the headless man and I happened to exit at the same stop. Amazingly, he pulled the cord before I did. I followed him out. He walked across the street, which happened to be the way I was going, so I kept following. He was very resolute in his walk, which I like in a man. I had forgotten all about my thirst. I tried to keep up with the headless man, but he took 2 steps for every one of mine. He was walking that fast. He raced to the curb to avoid a car, whereas the same car almost hit me. I felt like a fool. That night, Mitchell and I had plans to see a movie, but as usual, we couldn't decide which one. In this, as in everything, we were on different pages. He enjoyed a rollicking comedy, whereas I was partial to the art film. He liked sci-fi stories about silly-looking creatures invading a human person's bathroom mid-shave, whereas I liked movies about confused people trying to find their ways out of the morose hands that had been dealt to them, the kind of movie in which everyone is doomed. Mitchell and I were built differently on different premises. The premise Mitchell was built on involved a double-wide barge plowing through a roiling ocean, whereas my premise involved the shadows of trees that were about to be felled. We went to a comedy because, as usual, Mitchell gets his way. If he doesn't, he pouts. He has a very beautiful mouth, and so the pout is not as annoying as you might think. Still, it's a bore to be with someone who pouts, beautiful mouth or no. So I gave in to the comedy, which would surely irritate me. I am that way with comedy, something about someone trying to make me laugh. I resist. Mid-movie, I go to the concessions and buy more Junior Mints. There I see the headless man. It was too much. He was walking away from the concession stand with his popcorn, and I would have given anything to have been behind him on line. The funny thing is that no one seemed to pay much attention to the headless man. You'd think they would. Headless. It was as if this movie-going crowd had seen headless men every day of their lives. It was as if the headless man was no more unusual than, say, a woman with long blonde hair. He was making his way to Theater 8, and on impulse I decided to go into that theater too. I was bored with the comedy. Mitchell laughed very loudly and occasionally slapped my leg. God knows what was so funny. The movie had been about 2 men who were friends and who got into trouble. The trouble was supposed to make you laugh. One man kept hurting himself. When I left the theater for the Junior Mints, that man was all bandaged up, which was also supposed to be funny. But here was the headless man, headed into Theater 8, which featured just my kind of movie, one in which 2 women sit on a bed and talk for hours, and in between talking, they try on clothes. I sat directly behind the headless man, and so of course I had a good view of the film. I noticed the little tube that protruded from his scar-knotted neck had been replaced with a larger transparent funnel, and into this funnel the man fed kernels of popcorn. Very strange. The film was not sad so much as enigmatic. Who were these women and why did they pass their time so fruitlessly, was the question the film posed. I had quite a time locating Mitchell in the parking lot after the movie. He was angry I had left the comedy and told me that, as usual, I had been rude. I told him all about the headless man because I thought he would be interested. I told him about the jagged neck stump and the funnel and the weed whacking job. Once I began talking, I couldn't stop. All my theories about the headless man poured forth. He must have a brain located somewhere, since he is obviously functioning like a human. Perhaps he uses sign language. Maybe his brain was taken out of his body and frozen until they could transplant it some other place, like his thigh. He was really quite handsome otherwise, I said. Stop, said Mitchell. You are talking nonstop, so I will forget your bad manners. I don't care about this so-called headless man. You don't find it intriguing, I said. Mitchell opened the car door. Why would I? There are all kinds of freaks in this world. What's one more? Unbelievable, I thought, as Mitchell started the car by doing this annoying thing he does, which is to rev the engine very loudly 3 times. Then he backed out and hit a car that was driving by. Son of a bitch, yelled Mitchell, leaping out of the driver's door and shaking his fist. Honestly, Mitchell was such a stereotype. I decided to remain in the car so as not to be humiliated by Mitchell's behavior. I turned on the radio and listened to the jazz station. Coltrane, in the middle of playing my favorite things, which is very long if you know the cut. Then Mitchell stopped yelling and Coltrane stopped playing. I decided to get out of the car, and there, believe it or not, was the headless man. He was writing something on a pad of white paper, and he jerked his neck toward me in a kind of friendly acknowledgement. I swear to God, I think he remembered me from the afternoon bus stop. I smiled at his neck. Mitchell was still fuming, but he was fuming silently. The car was not so damaged, a broken taillight was all. The headless man resumed his writing, then put his hands together in a prayer-like gesture and bowed very respectfully to Mitchell. Mitchell scowled. There's not much you can do when a headless man bows respectfully to you. The headless man had written his name, phone number, license, and the name and number of his insurance company. After all the writing, he'd drawn a happy face. It was very neatly executed. He's obviously a gentleman, I said. What would you know about it, said Mitchell. I must say these comedies do nothing to put you in a good mood, I remarked, which was a mistake, because Mitchell drove very fast, which he knows makes me nervous. I was clutching the piece of paper the headless man had written on, and by the time we got home, it was all crumpled and damp from my nerves. At home, I got to thinking, the headless man had left a phone number, but what does he do if someone actually calls? I asked Mitchell, who rolled his eyes, which I could have predicted, and cracked open a beer. Then he surfed the channels in order to find another rollicking comedy. What's the use, I said out loud, which was a mistake, because Mitchell then said, what have I done now? What's my latest infraction? I went into the bedroom and tried to read a magazine. But in the back of my mind, I was still wondering, what would happen if a person telephoned the headless man? In the middle of an article about why men stray, I wonder what would happen if I telephoned the headless man. I took the piece of paper from the dresser top and smoothed it out. The man's name was Russ McCormick. Hello, Russ, I imagined saying. That night I dreamt about the headless man. In the dream he had a well-shaped, perfect head, only it was made of stone, like the head of a famous statue by Michelangelo. Thus he still couldn't talk or make eye contact. He was weed-whacking, and I sat in the grass nearby, looking at the sky, which was filled with moorheads, all sizes and shapes, a great variety of expressions on the faces, sad, angry, bored, sly, frightened, you name it. Then I woke up. Mitchell had already showered and was fixing his shirt collar in our mirror. I spent most of the morning at my desk picking up the phone, dialing, then hanging up. In between, I tried to write a poem which began, the headless man's head is in the clouds, but my heart wasn't in it. It was so quiet. We turned the AC off, and there were no dogs barking outside, no cars driving by, no mourning doves going coo-hoo, coo-hoo. Nothing. I dialed the headless man's number again, just to liven things up. The phone rang twice, then there was a soft click. I said, Russ? Russ, are you there? I could hear the silence of his room at the other end of the phone, hear it turning over and beginning again. I listened for a long time. That silence went right to my soul. When I hung up, I could still hear it. That night I ended it with Mitchell. I said what they tell you to say, which is, this isn't working for me. Mitchell looked stunned. He cracked open a beer and shook his head. Women are such fickle cunts, he said. He doesn't usually talk like this, but he was mad. I understood that. The next day I left. Funnily, I never encountered the headless man again. Once I thought I saw him in the grocery store, perusing the veggies, but this man's head really was camouflaged against the red cabbages he was leaning over. I looked for him on the U grounds for a while, but then I thought, wait a minute, am I really thinking of having a relationship with a headless man? I don't think so. So I stopped looking, and that was that.
Wow.